Hello and welcome to the Block Explorer. I'm Colin Brightfield.
Hey folks, I'm Cash Upton.
The Block Explorer is here to educate and inspire you about the world of crypto and NFTs.
We'll do deep dives into critical concepts of understanding what's happening and discuss the current events shaping the space of blockchain.
We're making this podcast for the curious, the free thinkers, and the change makers that propel us forward.
As we embark on our adventures, remember that none of this financial advice and that crypto can be risky.
In this episode, we go over the current situation in the regulation news that was important last week in regards to the infrastructure bill in the Senate, as well as discuss what it means in the bigger picture for the crypto world in general.
Yes, sir. We're really here to dissect what happened last week because it was a big shakedown for the blockchain and crypto ecosystem. So we want to divert, a whole episode to kind of dive deep into it and synthesize, a lot of the takes from other very entrenched professionals in the industry, and give our listeners kind of the whole picture side as best as we can.
Yeah, Cash, this is the biggest regulation moment so far in the history of crypto. So it's worth taking time to really explain and dive deep into what's going on, what are the implications, and how is this going to affect the industry moving forwards?
Colin, tell us first what happened in DC with the infrastructure bill last week.
Yeah, so for my source, I'm relying heavily on Jake Travinsky, who's your friendly local crypto lawyer. He's based in DC. He works for the Blockchain Association, which is the premier alliance of stakeholders in the crypto industry. They set up an association, a nonprofit there that lobbies for and advocates for proper regulation of crypto. And he's probably the foremost authority on regulation in crypto in DC at the moment. So I am amazed at how quickly all of this went down, and so is he. So what I found out is that Jake Travinsky and the Blockchain Association, they've been working with members of Congress and other people in DC to come together on what would be some smart regulation for crypto. And this has been months in the making, behind the scenes.
Yep.
And so the fact that this language came at them so quickly kind of blindsided them, and they're the ones that are working on it.
Yeah, Jake said it was very out of the blue that they just put that in without anyone else really getting word of it.
Yeah, because he said that usually when language like this is going to be inserted into a bill, people that are on the ground like him usually find out about it a little bit sooner than the general public, and usually it's even like weeks in advance, and they found out just about 9 days in advance before this was actually going to be made public. So they had very little time to respond and come up with a strategy about what to do about it.
And that language in the bill was essentially making almost everyone involved in crypto transactions qualify as a broker, meaning they'd be subject to all the same reporting requirements as centralized exchanges.
Yeah, exactly. But let's back up before that. Why was this even this is an infrastructure bill, right? So why was crypto even involved?
You got to pay for it somehow, right?
Yeah. So the way that Congress works is when they introduce a bill with a lot of spending, such as this, which I think is 1.2 trillion.
It's up there
in the budget for the infrastructure bill. They want to find ways to pay for it, of course. So when they introduce a big spending bill, they also want to introduce usually some new kind of taxes or new kind of revenue generating mechanism to cover the expense of the bill. So crypto became kind of the target for the fundraising to pay for this bill. And they did it with this broad sweeping language that really doesn't make any sense if you actually understand how the crypto industry works. And
right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and that goes back to who was introducing and what were the motives, and was it ultimately senators or was it, the Fed?
Yeah, exactly. So in the United States, Congress is supposed to be the ones that are introducing legislation, not the Department of the Treasury. but it looks like from what we're hearing, and it is that there's some parties in the Department of the Treasury that are having kind of an outsized influence on the process, the due process of legislation in the Congress, and that Congress is the one who makes the bills, because Congress is the people that are the ones that are elected by the people, and
Right.
not some just random unknown people in the Department of the Treasury. So it seems like, yeah. So what Jake Travinsky was saying is, he has a quote where he said, "I try not to assume malice when you can assume incompetence." So maybe they're just really, really bad, and they're just not really understanding what's going on, and that could be the issue. But either way, it is kind of disconcerting that some of the language is that's being included on the bill has to be approved by the Department of the Treasury,
Right.
which is the central banks.
Instead of the Treasury Department enforcing the laws of the Senate, they're helping write them, which, has its whole, we're going to dive into that a little bit later. I want to focus a little bit more to just dive into what the bill was saying is, what are these digital assets that would be brokered, right? And so the definition of a digital asset in the bill is any digital representation of value recorded on a cryptographically secured ledger. So that's why I got the whole community up in arms, right? That's so broad. And that goes back to do you know what you're actually regulating? And do you have education on what you're trying to do? Because there's so much digital value on that type of ledgers, right?
Yeah, I mean that could include pretty much everything, because if you have any asset, anything that's recorded on any blockchain, pretty much, because that's what a cryptographically secured ledger is. That means a blockchain.
Yep.
So if you have anything on a blockchain, you're now required to have the same tax liability and reporting duties as a stockbroker would have.
Yeah. Jake Travinsky gave the examples of miners, liquidity providers, and DeFi interface providers and aggregators. NFT marketplaces could even be captured by this. And in theory, even the content creators themselves of those sorts of NFTs. But there's just no fundamental way for the blockchain ecospace to comply with these, right? And that's what is the beauty of the blockchain in some regards, right? Is the fact that it is decentralized and cannot be, completely, regulated by centralized interest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there was an amendment that was introduced to this language kind of in the 11th hour by Senators Juan Wyden of Oregon, Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, and Cynthia Loomis from Wyoming. So it was a bipartisan group of people a group of senators that came in, and they tried to offer some clarifying language and saying that the term broker doesn't apply to miners, stakers, or software developers. And they acknowledge that the development of crypto and financial innovation has a huge potential for the American economy and the American people, for job growth, GDP growth, and that it would be, devastating to have poor legislation, actually go through that would limit the innovation that's happening in this. So they
Right.
presented this amendment in the 11th hour, and it needed a unanimous consent to pass. And because one of the senators didn't get his defense spending into the bill, he did not approve the amendment, and so it did not go through. And so we were left with the original language in the bill, which is the one that says everyone's a broker.
Right. And that goes back to the whole, if we overregulate and we have devastating legislation here in America, crypto and DeFi and blockchain doesn't stop. It's on the internet across the world. So it's going to continue going. And essentially the United States could be left behind if there isn't smart legislation. And that comes back to our mission here on the Block Explorer, right? To be that educative force to help legislatures, help their constituents, help just the common person understand why blockchain is so important to take seriously.
Indeed, Cash, indeed. Yeah, and it's important to understand too, the strategy of the Treasury Department, and maybe why they're being so adamant of having this language inserted into the bill. Right. And it's because, it's kind of this idea of, ask for as much as possible, or just even like take as much as possible in that first negotiation. And then from there, you kind of just back off. Versus if you just start with a little, it's really hard to like get more. So it seems like they're just trying to go in and grab the biggest swath of oversight that they possibly can. And then they'll kind of take step backwards from there as they need, as the industry demands, or as they see fit. But it seems like it's kind of like this huge power grab right now from the Department of the Treasury and the central bank to get a handle on this industry, when in reality it deserves a much more nuanced approach than this kind of sweeping kind of last minute language that they threw in. And also, I think it goes back to a bigger point, in that in an absence of real leadership on what the policy should be towards crypto as a whole from the executive branch of the government, like President Biden and his team and his administration, they haven't really presented a coherent like plan or strategy of how they see crypto and blockchain technology fitting into the larger American economic landscape for the future. And so without that lack of leadership, then, it's kind of just the loudest voices, get to fill up the void. And the loudest voices right now are Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's kind of taken this crusade against crypto right now, which is a shame because, I really agree with a lot of her ideas. And she's also like, she's like really on the same path as far as like being anti huge corporate big banks. And she's very anti big banks, but she stops there, and she thinks like, maybe it's almost like the government should take even more control and instead of the banks. But we're saying, no, like that's not the answer. It's actually the government should be not in control. The bank shouldn't be in control. Actually, it should be decentralized, and no one should be in control.
Yes, that's the perfect wraparound to the DeFi story, which is Bitcoin wasn't getting this type of regulation. And that's because the Ethereum network allows for all these decentralized finance applications and liquidity and staking and all that to be able to actually function in the crypto blockchain ecospace where it wasn't possible before.
Yeah, because if you buy Bitcoin, for instance, and you buy it with US dollars on a centralized exchange like Coinbase or Kraken or FTX or any of these exchanges, you're KYC'd already. Like that they already know who you are. And if you just keep your Bitcoin in your Coinbase, then it's just like having your money in a bank account. They know exactly who you are. They can control what goes on with it. They can monitor it. They can surveil it. So it's no big deal. It's just kind of status quo for them. So they didn't really create any big waves in the regulation standpoint. It wasn't such a big deal yet. But with DeFi, it's a whole different story, because decentralized finance, DeFi, is decentralized. So can you really regulate something that's decentralized?
Exactly. Can you regulate?
And my answer would be like, it depends, because a lot of these protocols, a lot of things that are called decentralized, or a lot of things that are in the crypto space that brand themselves as being blockchain or crypto or, some decentralized. It's a spectrum, it's not just black or white. And a lot of these protocols are sometimes hybrids. Some of them are actually really, really centralized, like the Binance Smart Chain. That's a centralized blockchain versus, Ethereum, which is a completely decentralized blockchain. So it's definitely it depends where the blockchain fits and actually how truly decentralized it actually is. And if it's actually decentralized, that's the whole point, right? It can't be regulated because there is no one point of failure, no one point of control. That's the entire point of the design.
That's the entire point of the design, and where it takes the power and puts it in the control of everyone who holds the asset, the people. So,
and it's peer-to-peer transactions, right? So, right, for instance, for people that may not understand what decentralized finance is, let's break it down. So, right, if I were to send you money cash through traditional finance, I'd have to do like a to ACH transfer or a Zelle or even a Venmo, right? That goes to a bank first, right? So my money would go to Wells Fargo, and actually it doesn't actually move. It just stays in Wells Fargo, and Wells Fargo just updates their ledgers, right? So I don't even own, but that signal, that command goes to Wells Fargo, and then it goes to your bank and your account or whatever, or Venmo, whoever. There's an intermediary, right? There's
It'd be
something that
golden.
sits
It'd
in
be
between.
Golden One Credit Union, because I actually just shut down all Bank of America accounts a few weeks ago.
Awesome.
Yeah, stoked to do that. We don't need to have their investments and all their dirty fuels.
So anyway, there's something that sits in between, right? There's an intermediary, and that's centralized banking. That's what we have now, right? But what's different with decentralized finance is that I can send you money that actually I have in my wallet, right from my wallet straight to your wallet. And it's custodian, meaning that I actually have custody of the asset.
You're
right?
your own custodian.
Usually Wells Fargo just has all your money, or whatever bank has all your money in their account, and they're doing stuff with it. And they just have a thing by your name that says, okay, I owe you whatever your account ledger says. And then if you come along and you ask for it, then they give you it. But otherwise they're off in finance land doing things with your money, making much more yield than you could, and then giving you 0.01% or even less, and then taking 3 days to process transactions.
And when you have DeFi apps that are built on top of the Ethereum blockchain, for instance, like Aave, it's doing that peer-to-peer liquidity, right? You're putting your liquidity into
it's peer to protocol. So you have peer to peer or peer to protocol,
right.
So, but it's straight to a decentralized protocol, which is essentially a computer program that lives on a blockchain like Ethereum, and it runs on its own by being decentralized over a network of servers that's constantly changing and updating.
And that's really what's giving the power to the people that are holding the asset to make liquidity, profits on it or yield, right? Instead of the big centralized banks.
Yeah, because you're the ones that you get rid of all of the value that would be otherwise captured by the bank, or all the inefficiencies that are involved with having those banks are gone.
And let's think about
all the inefficiencies that big corporate banks have that protocols don't have. Like, protocols don't have to have huge, big offices in big cities and pay expensive employees and pay human resources and pay compliance and all these other layers of lawyers and all that stuff. Think about it. Really think about it. It's just a computer program. It doesn't need any staff.
I love it.
It doesn't need anything. It doesn't need an office. It doesn't need to commute anywhere. Like, it doesn't need to eat. Like, it doesn't need lunch breaks.
That's the point of it.
It just works. It just works. And all of the value that would otherwise be swallowed up by all that market inefficiency. Think about how inefficient it is to have all that. How doesn't it seem like a big dinosaur when you think about it? It's like, man, these banks are just like the dinosaurs, and you're just saying they're so like big, and they're not agile, and like they're running on software that was mostly like written in the 80s.
And that's the thing, right? Like, blockchain destabilizes their hold, because one, you don't need the vaults if you have the blockchain security, and two, you have the smart contracts where you don't need as many lawyers. So like you said, you're essentially just allocating resources a lot more efficiently. Sorry, some folks might lose their jobs, but like, come on, can we not argue that there's so much benefit that comes from taking that power away from the Bank of Americas and the really, big banks that control way too much.
Yeah. And let's not forget the 2008 financial crisis and how they all got bailed out while the rest of us just had to deal with it.
All that over leveraging.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we can go down that whole rabbit hole, and we're part of the bankless nation over here. So we definitely can bash banks all day, but
Yeah,
the bigger picture
we don't need to go
thing
down that rabbit hole.
is that we're making something better, right? It's not to be negative and bash banks. It's that we just have a better solution. That's all. And the
Exactly.
solution is decentralized finance, and it just works better. And that's the thing. It's like when a better idea comes along, people tend to adopt it, and it spreads. So like that's why DeFi is spreading. I mean, it's not rocket science. Why are people using DeFi? Because once they, once they get over maybe some of the technical hurdles and or maybe a few of the education, you know, curves as they start out, the learning curve when they start out, once they get over that learning curve, they're really like off to the races. And if you have to go back and use your traditional bank, like when you have to, like when I have to do transactions on in my traditional bank, it seems like I'm going back in time, and you're just like, why does this even exist anymore? But ultimately, decentralization is censorship resistant, right? So the point is that, okay, even if Gary Gensler of the the head of the SEC, or Janet Yellen, the Secretary of the Treasury, even if they wanted to come in and do their best to regulate decentralized finance, I mean, what would they do? How could they do it? You can't. In the best they could do is they could maybe limit some of the centralized exchanges from like changing from fiat world to crypto world, right? So like Coinbase, like they could limit your ability to go back and forth from the crypto world to the fiat world, which would be a shame. And I don't think they'll do that. But I mean, Caption, your view, like what does it mean for you in the long term and big picture view here?
Well, I think that the U.S. is very dangerously close to, cutting itself off to a very massive, influx of, economic growth. And as we're talking about too, democratization of access to capital and financial resources. And, a lot of the overlending and, there's been unfair mortgage lending, redlining over the years. All that was done because a human was in charge of those mortgages and those contracts. And when you make it a smart contract, they're not looking at ethnicity, gender, criminal background necessarily. They're looking at, do you have the means to make this contract work? And if you do, they let you do it. And that's what I see as the beauty of the blockchain and being able to have DeFi even go outside of America, because that's what we're talking about too, right? And we're going to have a whole nother episode on the broader world implications of crypto and blockchain, because it is so much more in places where they don't even have banks in their little villages, or they're, within 50 miles of where people live, and that's what we really want to help people, kind of fall in love with more about. There's the beauty of the infinite possibilities of the blockchain.
Yeah, you touched on a few good points there that I want to extrapolate on. One of them is that crypto is location agnostic. So what does that mean? That means that it doesn't matter where you are, you can do crypto if you have access to the internet.
The validating nodes are all over the world. They're not just in one country.
Yeah, exactly. So if the US comes down hard on the crypto industry, on the blockchain industry, and then the industry will just move. They'll just go abroad. They'll just go to places where they will be received with open arms. And I'm sure there will be some countries in the world that will have very progressive attitudes towards this technology, and we'll see the promise that it entails. And that if that happens, it'll be really tragic, like you said, because this is the huge next technological wave to hit the world. And it's a massive opportunity for economic growth, for people to create jobs, for the US to be a leader in this next century. And if we clamp down on this massive innovation of crypto and blockchain, it's really going to put us behind, and we're going to just be playing catch up for the next couple decades, which is really just, would be just a bummer, since a lot of the innovation that is actually happening in the US, or a lot of people creating the innovation are Americans. So, you
hit on such a good point. I mean, just look at what China did. They kicked out Bitcoin miners, and from everything I've read about it, it seems like it's because they saw the instability that Bitcoin could, put onto their dictatorship, and that Bitcoin could add, some sovereignty to their people's, livelihood. And they clamped down on, they kicked out Bitcoin, and they're now making their own central bank digital currency, which is, embracing crypto, but not right. And doing it in their own ways for power and control.
Exactly, because we touched on this in the What is Money episode, where we talked about how if you control the monetary supply, then you can use that to control your society. And it's a method of control. Economic control is another means of controlling people. And if you control the money, then it's much easier to control people. So China, yeah, they did it like that. Bitcoin was an alternative system, and it was created an alternative economic system that was outside of their, communist party control. And so, yeah, they clamped down on that, and then they accelerated into their central bank digital currency program, where they're going to have essentially a centralized digital currency. So when we talk about decentralized finance, yeah, so it's not that, it's the opposite of that. It's just a digital version of the Chinese yuan that they're pushing out. And the thing is, though, they're embracing this revolution and going full throttle in forwards, whereas the US is kind of just stalling or lacking any kind of real leadership on the issue at all. And I think that's kind of like the bigger thing is I wish we had some leadership that recognized the potential here and understood that this is a mass opportunity. We need to lean into it.
Absolutely. No, this really is a massive opportunity that we should be leaning into. And, with this legislation, like, to bring back around what I was saying about the Bitcoin analogies, it didn't really garner this much attention. And now it is. Crypto's growing up. The decentralized finance aspect has a lot of value. It has a lot of power going to people instead of institutionalized finance, right? So they're realizing that it can no longer be ignored. And, it's big enough for it to be talked about on the Senate floor now. Like, what were we hearing?
I mean, ultimately,
people were saying,
it's yeah, like on the Senate floor. I mean, it's amazing that people were saying the words miners, validators, and staking, like, in the Capitol building. And I was saying, ultimately, it's just incredibly bullish for crypto as a whole.
Yep.
Because, yeah, it's too big to be ignored now, and the industry was challenged in a really big way, and the industry showed up in a really big way to defend our interests, and that is incredibly inspiring and gives me a lot of hope and optimism for the future, because it was never really, we never really saw the industry have to come together as a group to rally around a cause like this in DC yet. It's really been the biggest example of the crypto industry having to, a all hands on deck kind of moment.
It really was
where everyone was like, okay, call your senators, like send some tweets to your senators, do what you can, because this is a major deal. And the fact that the industry was able to come together as a community and be effective in communicating. Obviously, it's not the best result as far as the language that got put in the bill, but that can be changed. There can be amendments to be that. It's going to go to the House before it gets finally passed. I don't know if that'll change it, but I mean, it's not supposed to go into effect for another 2 years. So, I mean, who knows what the final language will be? But regardless, is that the community came together and showed that, we're here and we're not to be, just pushed around, and that crypto is a real political force in the world.
I really appreciate your, perspective to drawing us in that, it takes 2 years to get into effect. So people are expecting, some back and forth, maybe some parts going to court. This isn't necessarily the final, and it isn't going to go into effect immediately. So that's something that I'm glad you brought up.
Yeah, exactly. And some of the other implications is that, I kind of feel like it was almost kind of like crypto's Pearl Harbor moment, where no one was really expecting all of a sudden on this infrastructure bill for some really, really gnarly language that makes no sense in regulating the crypto industry to all of a sudden get inserted in the 11th hour, right under the right under the bell, and it was must pass legislation. So it was like, okay, well, this bill is going to pass. So whatever the language is, it's going to pass. So, we kind of took everyone from surprise. It was a big surprise attack, but what it did is it really galvanized the whole space, the whole community as a whole. And now, we're ready, and we're building the infrastructure, and we're ready. That was the first battle, but it's definitely not the end of the war. And we know that we knew this was coming. We've known this was coming for a long time. We just didn't know exactly how it's going to play out. And, this is kind of like the first stage in a long, multi-year, multi-decade probably process of crypto becoming into the mainstream.
Absolutely. And I like to bring us back to our Jake Chervinsky quote of, I always try not to assume malice when you can assume incompetence. And, that's really why we're here, is to educate and to inform people to how you can get involved, how you can become more educated yourselves, and, hold our representatives accountable to being educated and up to date on one of the most cutting edge technology, cryptographic blockchain. That it's something that brings so many aspects of innovation together that the world and humanity hasn't seen before. And we really are here, along for the ride to educate and explore together.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's really important to stay tuned to what's happening in the space and to educate yourself, educate your friends, your colleagues, educate your family, because the world is changing quickly, and it's behooves you to be ahead of this curve so you can take advantage of it, and also so you can be well positioned as these changes occur. And when it comes to staying involved, like I mentioned before, Twitter is a great way for you to make your voice heard to your representatives and your senators. Sending emails is often something that people do, or even making phone calls is sometimes effective, but they all have their phones in their pockets, and they're checking their Twitter. And so they get their tweets. So if you reply to their tweet, if you send them a direct message, if you tweet at them, it's more than likely that they'll see it, or especially, if a bunch of us are doing that, then it really does make a difference in getting, another drop in the bucket on our side. So stay involved, stay educated, and let's keep building this community together.
Yes, sir. I love it. Gotta be involved. Gotta help bring about the change that we want to see. I think that's it for now. Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's it for now. I hope that you enjoyed this episode.
Really love exploring the blockchain with you this week, sir, and all of our listeners.
Crypto is changing the world. We're here to ensure you're ready.
So please subscribe, share this podcast with your friends, and leave us a review.
We look forward to sharing our next episode with you.
Yes, sir. Cheers. Have a good night.
Cheers.